Hey everyone, Cursed Deck Builder here, making our way to 10,000 decks assisted. And here we are with Chatterfang, Squirrel General, Squirrel Aristocrats deck. What a fun combination. This deck comes to us from Anonymous, who says, I'd just like some general feedback on this list and what I could add to build for more Squirrel spam or Aristocrats. We will definitely have some suggestions for you here. And before we get started, as always, the deck list will be in the video description below. And I highly recommend you go in and take a look at what the deck is and how you can improve it. I think this is a very strong deck, and I also think the avenues to improve it, if you've been watching my channel for a bit now, you might have an idea about what things I'm going to say. But might miss some things you think of. So if you think of anything I don't, please put it in the comments below. I would love for us to all get together and help this deck be the best it can be. So, who is Chatterfang Squirrel General, and why are we using them as our Squirrel Commander? Well, Chatterfang is a 3-mana in green 3/3 Squirrel Warrior. It has Forest Block, which means it can't be blocked if your opponents have forests. And whenever you create a token, one or more, you're going to make those tokens, and you're going to make that many 1/1 green squirrel creature tokens as well. Technically instead, so it won't trigger itself as you make tokens, but basically whenever you make tokens, you'll make that many squirrels. And then Chatterfang's ability is that for 1 black and sacrifice a squirrel, which is what makes it a black-green commander, or sacrifice X squirrels, third creature gets +X, -X until end of turn, which can boost your creatures, but much more reliably is a form of removal. So, our main plan is to use Chatterfang to make as many squirrels as possible as we incidentally create tokens, and then use both the strategies of Squirrel Tribal and Aristocrats, which, for those who remember, is a strategy where we purposely let our creatures die or kill them ourselves so that we can take advantage of triggers in order to go towards a win. I think this is going to be a very, very solid strategy. So the first thing we should check, as we always do, is the mana curve. And if you notice the curve, you're probably going to hone in on to the first thing I'm going to say. And it is about our 3-mana slot, which is 21 cards. That's about a fifth of the deck. This is the same mana cost as our commander. As I always say, we want to limit the number of cards that are the same mana as our commander because, they compete in that mana spot for our original cast of our commander. Now, truth be told, this is a temporary problem, right? After you cast the Chatterfang, the problem goes away. And generally, the lower the mana cost of our commander is, the less of a problem that is. This is much more of a problem when our commanders are 5 mana and higher. However, at the sheer number of 3-drops, we already have an avenue to attack anyways, so we gotta find a way to make things even, like lower the curve here, because even though we also have really, really good 3-drops, right? So they're all competing with our commander all the time, so we gotta find a way around that. Additionally, we seem to have quite a few 6-drops. There's 6/6-drops, so we might take a look at those ourselves and see what we can do. The next thing I've noticed directly by looking at the list is, isn't it interesting that we only have 22 creatures? This is a creature tribal deck. This is a squirrel tribal deck. And now, to be fair, there's a lot of cards that we benefit from that just create tokens, which are firmly in instants of sorceries or non-creature spells. But if we look through our non-creature spells, we'll notice that not a lot of them actually create tokens. So we have a bit of a discrepancy here. And so I want to attack this giant sorcery pile and make some of them into creatures. And one of the ways I want to attack it is I want to point out that a large chunk of these cards are removal. And we're going to try to reduce that number of removal as much as we can, because we have to remember that Chatterfang is our removal. Now, I'm not saying we should get rid of all of it, right? Like, For example, we have Murder here, and I think Murder is a perfectly fine card in a deck like this. But we don't also need Grim Bounty. Even if it creates a token, that's too much mana for what it does. So let's look at the cards we have here and be a little picky. Well, the first thing is Wolf's Quarry at 6 mana. It's just too much mana. 6 mana for 3/1/1s, which is 6/1/1s with our commander out, because 3 squirrels, 3 boars. And then the idea is that when each boar dies, it makes a food, which is another 3 tokens. So that's 9. That's 12 tokens, right? Yeah, 2, that's the 6. Okay, I'm a little okay with it now that I forgot about the food aspect of it. But it does seem a lot of mana. It's one of our 6 drops, so I want to be a little picky with that one. Just, I think the benefit is big enough that I'm not going to say get rid of it, but it's important to note here. Casualties of War, on the other hand, is 6 mana, is a bunch of removal, and we're not in a ramp deck. So I particularly don't like this card here. You want to be proactive. You don't want to be taking a turn off in order to, destroy a bunch of permanents. You want to be making squirrels. You want to be holding up mana for Chatterfang. This is just not where you want to be. And as I've said many times before, I don't particularly like this card because you tend to sandbag it until you get enough effects of it. Because if you're only getting 3 of 5 of destroy targets, or if you're picking subpar targets just so you can cast this, you're not going to be particularly happy. So I really don't like Casualties of War. I often think it needs to be cut. And I think especially in a deck like this that's not about ramping, it's an easy cut right away. Grim Bounty, like I said, it's removal. Fade from History. I don't know if I like this here. I think it's of all the enchantments and artifact destruction, this is one of the stronger ones. I like that it works, gives us bears with our to make squirrels. But we have quite a few enchantments. We have quite a few artifacts. We have a bunch of tokens that are enchantments and artifacts. So this feels really like we're going to be shooting ourselves in the foot. So I don't want to play that. And in fact, I'll skip ahead and say a lot of these, we have quite a few like Atraxas Fall, um, Devour Intellect. We have these cards that are like pinpoint on destroying. Sorry, those 2 cards don't do the same thing. We'll come back to those 2, but cards like Atraxas Fall for sure that also destroy or deconstruct, that destroy artifacts. I don't think this is where we want to be. If we want one of these, we should be playing Nature's Claim, which is the first, the 1 mana version of this. But this is too many removal for enchantments. I think you'll be fine. You don't have, there's not a lot of enchantments that just shut down your deck. So playing 1 or 2 is all right. Druidic Ritual and Revive are also cards that I don't think you should be playing. You're going to lose cards to the graveyard. This isn't a graveyard deck. I think you should just let them go. I know sometimes it can feel rough when you lose a card and it's just gone forever, but that's just Magic. Revive is just really strong when you have a deck that purposely puts a bunch of cards in the graveyard from your deck as opposed to just sacrificing them. And so a lot of times you're going to be holding Revive and you're not going to have any targets. Same thing with Macabre Blotts. I think you're just not going to be able to use it very well. Exponential Growth also feels very weird here, though Chatterfang can get really, really strong. Once again, I don't think this is where you want to be. You are in Squirrels or Aristocrats, and this card does neither. It has a very, very high mana cost for it to be good. I think you could easily cut this as well. Coming back down, another one I wanted to briefly talk about is Diabolic Tutor. I like Diabolic Intent up there because it's 2 mana, but Diabolic Tutor is too much mana for your deck. You don't have a lot of silver bullets you want to be pulling, and 4 mana is just too much mana for you to pull another card that probably costs 4 or more mana out of your deck. So I think this could easily be cut. I'm going to suggest a 1 or 2 draw spells instead. So in the meantime, let's not worry about it too much. Let's just cut this card. Carnivorous Canopy is another destroy artifact or enchantment. Once again, we can cut this pretty nicely. Coming up here, Thirsting Roots. I know that I've seen some +1/+1 synergies, but I don't think you have enough for it to be worthwhile. But since it gets a land, I'm just going to leave it. I think this is fine. Many Partings. also in the same way, but this makes it. I like many partings a lot more, so I think this is great. We should absolutely keep it. However, Devour Intellect and Duress do not belong in this deck. Single target discard spells are really, really good in one-on-one, and they're pretty bad in a four-person format. They tend to be really, really good when you have a very high-powered deck, where you know one player is going to have counter magic, and you need to stop them so that you can win the game with a infinite combo. You should not be playing these cards fairly. You know, you're building a squirrel board and you're going to take a turn off to discard one of your opponent's cards. Hopefully, duress hits. Like it's not Thoughtseize, it's duress, so it won't hit every card in their hand. So, with that in mind, I don't think you want to play this. I think these are free to be other cards that are much stronger in your deck. To kind of sum up this entire section, which I think is the one I want to attack the most, um, these are reactive cards. You are the proactive deck. You are the deck at the table that other decks should be worried about and should be trying to stop. You don't need this large number of reactive spells, and in fact, your commander already has removal attached to it, so we should be somewhat cognizant of that. Lands, I think 34 is fine. You could probably go up to 35. I think you could be playing more ramp. You know, we have just a few here. I saw Rampant Growth here, Cultivates here. If you wanted, you could also play some of the other 2-mana cards, such as Farseek or Three Visits or Nature's Lore. Those are all playable. You could get away with that pretty easily with no cost, and then you might feel better about running this many lands. I like that you're playing Yavimaya. That makes Chatterfang unblockable. Really nice. Perfect. All right. When we come into enchantments, I should briefly talk about instants. I just think they're good. I think the instants are fine. Respite, I don't love, but at the same time, I don't dislike. I think that's fine. I think it's a fine card to play. They can use one turn to stop an attack, and I think that's good. I don't think you also need to play Druid's Deliverance. I would play one of them, and Druid's Deliverance is just stronger, so I think I would play it over Respite. Going to enchantments, uh, doubling season feels kind of overkill. I know it's a weird thing to say, but this spell will probably create more tokens than you have anything to do with. I think that's fine. I don't think it's a problem. I just think it's something worth considering. It is a very expensive, powerful card, and absolutely play it, but it might just be too strong for the deck. I'll let you decide that because that's a hard thing to gauge, but I think it's fine otherwise. Death's Presence is one of our 6-mana cards, and I think it's the one I like the least because though it is an Aristocrats card, it's a weird one because it basically transfers our creature's power onto other creatures, right? Um, we have squirrels, which are 1/1s. So all this writes actually most of the time is that when a creature dies, you put a +1/+1 counter on a creature, and I don't think that's worth 6 mana. I think it can be very good in certain setups. If you have all the squirrels, you have the Squirrel Lord, then it gets a lot better. But I think a lot of the time, this is just kind of okay because if the idea is, and I should have thought of this earlier. Actually, I should see if you're playing it or not. Okay. If the idea is that you're going to put it onto Chatterfang, I think you're just going to be happier just using Blade of the Blood Chief. Because Blade of the Blood Chief will just do that thing for 1 mana, right? You're going to attach it to Chatterfang, and it's just going to say whenever a creature dies, you're going to get a +1/+1 counter on Chatterfang. And that's any creature. Obviously, there's some text about vampires. Don't worry too much about that. But that first of the text is just, this is a 1/6 of a cost. If you count the equip, which I guess you should, it's a 1/3 of the cost of the other card. I think you're just going to have so much more success with this card than you would the giant enchantment. Then we have a bunch of 3-mana cards. I think Gaia's Anthem is perhaps too much mana. The thing is there's going to be just a lot of 3-drops that need to be cut, and I'm going to leave it to you. There's just a lot, and a lot of them are really good. Gaea's Anthem is fine because we are a tribal deck, and Cloakwood Hermit obviously is very, very good. But at a certain point, I want to cut as many as we can from sorceries because that's where we have the majority of them. And then we have a few creatures that I'm going to point at, but we should keep in mind that we do want to reduce our 3-mana cards. Um, Going very quickly into artifacts, Heraldic Banner, Icon of Ancestry. I think these could just be lower mana rocks or just other cards. Once again, we're just going to have to be really, really critical of every 3-mana card. If it's not essential to our game plan or just has a really, really high power level, unfortunately, we just have to cut it, right? So even here, I look at Savvy Hunter, which can create a food token once a turn cycle, unless someone attacks you, then maybe 2 by attacking, if you have an attack that's worth doing. That's 3 mana to create 1 extra scroll a turn. I don't think that's good enough. I think Savvy Hunter is really easy to cut here. Like compared to Peregrine Took, which I absolutely think you should be playing, because Peregrine Took, much like Chatterfang, just adds a number of tokens into play every turn, just increasing your number, building more, putting more cards in. I think it's very, very good. Now, I don't know how replacement effects work. Both of these cards use the word instead. I'm going to leave it up to you to go and look up those rules. I would be scared to play this in paper and not understand exactly where all of the replacements work, but I'm sure it should work in your favor. In the same time, Turvigon, yeah, Turvigon is also 3 mana to 4 mana, and I think if you're playing this card, you have to consider whether or not it's 4 mana, because don't play this at 3 mana. At 3 mana, it's a 1/1 trample, and that's awful. But at 4 mana, it's just a 2 mana trample. This is kind of a strange card. I am hesitant to tell you to play this. I would rather it cut. It's just very complicated for what it does. Academy Manufacturer is really good here, but stands out as one of the weaker 3 mana cards. I would keep it, but I would, make sure you can trigger this with food tokens as much as possible, with clue tokens, with treasure tokens. Because if you can't get all 3 tokens, unfortunately, it's just not very good. I worry with the instead triggers, you're only going to get 1 squirrel even at the end, because both of these cards will see you creating 1 food token, and Chatterfang will say, well, you're going to get 1 squirrel, and Academy Manufacturer says, well, you're going to clue a food and a treasure, and then you're going to get those 4, as opposed to 3 and 3 squirrels. I'm not sure. You have to look that up, because that could be a big problem for this deck, but then again, not the worst. All right. Finally, coming to artifacts, Cage Sun. So Cage Sun really does belong in 1-color decks, so that you can make the most of the doubling, because that's where the strength lies. So if you're playing it for just the +1/+1, I believe there's another 2-mana card that gives +2, +1/+1. Actually, let's find that, because you should be playing it for sure. Let's go to mana value. Oh, I already said 2, right? So let's put it green in. There's it. Sylvan Anthem. If you want the ability, because you're going to pick green anyways, right? Because you can't pick black, because otherwise your squirrels don't get bigger. So you're going to pick green, and so here's that ability for 2 green, as opposed to 6. It's not 3 mana, which is another option, really good. It is a very good ETB trigger, where you're going to scry every time. This is just going to be the better one, and I think you should, if you want that effect, you should just play that. Helm of the Host is great. Isika's Chariot is fine. They're not 4 mana, right? Chitter Splitter. Every time I read Chitter Splitter, I get confused. And I'm going to say that's a good enough reason not to run it. But it is a squirrel deck, and it does help you do what you want it to do. So I'm not gonna say take it out. But it's a weird card, right? It requires a constant influx of mana for it to do anything. And then it also sacrifices your tokens each turn. I don't know. I think it's close. The fact that it's 3 mana is the main thing I'm being very critical of. All right. So I was going through all the cards of some cards that I think, that, especially in the sources, we need to cut. What do I think you should add? All right, so a lot of these cards are going to be toward the Aristocrats package. I actually think your Squirrel tribal side is really well put together. I think the Aristocrat side needs the work. So all my suggestions are basically going to go into that direction. So let's start with the classics. Classic is Blood Artist. Blood Artist says whenever a creature dies, target player loses 1 life, you gain 1 life. It's actually, though it is the name of, at least to me, of the ability, it is actually one of the weaker ones, but it cares if anything dies, so it's pretty good. This can rack up damage particularly fast, but these cards work best in multiples. Zulaport Cutthroat is whenever your creature dies, each opponent loses a life. Definitely another card you should be running. You're going to be losing squirrels very, very quickly. On the same level of cards, we have Bastion of Remembrance, which is, if you note, a 3-mana card. So we need to be critical about it. So why am I suggesting a 3-mana card after I was very, very strongly against them? Well, let's see what it does. Well, it creates a creature token, which means you get a squirrel that's already good. And then it has a Zulaport Cutthroat effect that whenever your creatures die, each opponent loses a life and you gain a life. I think that's really worthwhile. I think even at 3 mana, this is worth playing. It's just very strong. And not only does it put you ahead on creatures and squirrels with its first ability, is that as your squirrels die, as board clears happen, you're gaining so much incidental damage. And it's going to be very, very powerful on your side. After that, let's go a little higher mana. We're in green, so we get to play Poison Tip Archer. This Poison Tip Archer is the combination of Zulaport Cutthroat and Blood Artist, where it triggers off any creature and it triggers on all your opponents. It also has the benefit of being a Reach Death Touch 2/3. It's very, very rare you'll block with it, but it still can block like a lethal flyer, which is particularly good. This is a very, very strong creature, and once again, very happily does not cost 3 mana. Then our last Blood Artist effect, that's directly a Blood Artist effect, is Sir Conrad the Grim. Whenever the creature dies, or a creature card is put into the graveyard from anywhere other than the battlefield, or a creature card leaves the battlefield, leaves the graveyard for any reason, this does 1 damage to each opponent, and for 1 in black, each player mills a card. You're really using it only for the first ability. It's just another copy of these Blood Artist effects. Sir Conrad the Grim, though, has a lot of nice little synergy with other cards and other strategies, or hates on other strategies very well. This card can do so much damage so quickly, and at the worst case, it is a mana sink where you can just dump mana into him, ideally dealing more and more damage to your opponents. This collection of Blood Artist effects, I think, will add a lot of incidental damage to your deck and give you a lot of additional power in that strategy. This is the payoff of playing Aristocrats. Now, I have a few more side cards for Aristocrats, namely the ones I always suggest of the Saraseer and Carrion Feeder. Both of these are 1-mana creatures that can sacrifice a creature at instant speed at no cost, and that's why they're there. They are there to eat your squirrels, because once you have all of these Blood Artist effects, you're going to want to be able to use them, at instant speed in order to respond to removal, in order to respond to, any form of exile effect, or something that just puts a damper on your game plan. Remember, these aren't squirrels, but their abilities just really make up for the fact that they're not squirrels. Don't worry too much about that. They're very strong, and you should absolutely play them. And then I'm going to put another Aristocrat enabler called Evolutionary Leap. This is one I don't see played often enough, and I think it's really, really good. Evolutionary Leap turns your tokens into the creature cards of your deck. And as one might assume, that 1/1 Squirrel token that was easy to make is not as good as almost any of your creatures here. Turning it into Arasta, or turning it into Braids, or even a Prosperous Innkeeper, it's a very, very good trade. So once you play Evolutionary Leap, yes, it costs mana, but as over the game continues, you sink mana into it. It's a very direct form of card selection, in a sense, or I guess it's not card selection, but a form of card selection where you are just drawing the next creature in your deck every time. It is very, very strong, and I highly, highly recommend using it. Once again, it is not a 3 mana, it's a 2. It functions as mana sink. It just does so well. And interestingly enough, I feel like this is the kind of card that if they printed now, it would say activate as a sorcery, but it doesn't, and you should be taking advantage of that. Very, very strong card. One more in black-green Aristocrats, and perhaps the strongest one, Moldavine Reclamation at 5 mana says whenever a creature you control dies, you gain 1 life and draw a card. You are going to draw so many cards. This card is so strong, and it is deceptively strong. You can play this on a board where you have 1 black mana still up with Chatterfang and like 10 squirrels. And if this resolves and stays in play, you are going to skyrocket ahead. You don't have to use it right away, right? The threat of activating it is actually strong enough. And as soon as the turn cycle ends, or you find a moment that you want to do it, you'll sacrifice those 10 squirrels, draw 10 cards, and start your next turn with a huge advantage. And remember, that's not always the only way to play it. This is incidental. So when you're just playing your regular strategy and using Chatterfang to destroy creatures, sacrificing creatures to other effects, or just having creatures killed in combat, you're going to draw cards. This is just so, so good. Please play this card. And then one more I just wanted to add for card draw. I felt like this is a deck that can play Greed. Greed is particularly good. It's not a 3 mana, so it's not Phyrexian Arena or Underworld Connections. Up to you. I don't think this is necessary, but I think it's pretty easy for you to play for just some additional card draw. So those are the general directions I think I would suggest the deck to go into. I think this deck is a really good start to a Chatterfang Squirrel Tribal Aristocrat deck. I really like the kind of cards you're using now, and I'm really interested to see what kind of changes you could make. I think leaning more towards the creatures, leaning more towards the Aristocrat game plan is going to be a lot more functional for you. And I think if we're a lot pickier with the sorceries and we're a lot pickier with the 3 mana drops, we're going to find some success, and the deck is going to feel a lot smoother to play. I hope this deck assist video was helpful to you. As always, if you have a new version of the deck or any deck you'd like me to take a look at, there is a form in the video description below that you can fill out to send me your deck. And if you'd like to skip the lineup, and make it so your deck is the next deck I work on, there is a link down there that you can do so. Also, if you can do the whole YouTube like, comment, subscribe thing, I would be a big fan of that. The channel is still growing, and everyone has been so helpful in the channel growing. I just know that we can steadily grow for the next while and have a lot of success and see a lot more decks and have a nice community of deck building. That's my goal. But until then, I love Chatterfang, I love Aristocrats, I'm excited to see the next version of the deck, and I wish you luck in building.